5 of them. So you guys actually only have about,
Did I do 5? No.
yeah, we've done some yesterday.
On the homework?
Yeah.
I thought they were on the, no. I don't think we did.
They had to do, well, 5th block.
5th block, yeah, yes. 5th block didn't it, but yeah. Yeah, you still, I did 2 for you.
You're
So.
not even, I mean, you have 2 days to do this and
There's
only 18 on it altogether.
16, that's
Yeah.
doable. Okay, so let's look at solving quadratics by factoring day 2. Now, they use the term slip and slide. This is whoever made this, they use this term. Basically, it's the tricky. If you look at your reference sheet, it's the trickier, I'll just put this, trickier trinomial. So they use the term slip and slide, but what all they mean by that is those are the trinomials that you have to do all 4 steps. So those are the trickier trinomials. It's the bottom right on your reference sheet. So if you're looking at your reference sheet, we're going to be looking at the bottom right box.
Are you wanting them to do that test now?
Yes, thank you. We have a couple people that need to take that quiz because I need grades on by tomorrow. So if you're doing the quiz, you can just get the notes later. Dylan, you need to finish. Brian, you're taking the quiz. Get a calculator and pencil. Maya's not here. Lydia, you're going to take the quiz. Josie and Brittany, not here.
Make sure you have a calculator and a pencil.
Calculator, pencil. And then if you want to... Do you have it written down on the test? D is greater than 0, there's 2 solutions. If D is, okay. There you go. It should, yeah. If not, let me know. Okay. So, what we're looking at today, we are doing it the same way. So we are still looking by solving by factoring. So we still need to get it equal to 0. We need to still to get everything on one side. We still need to go through, once we get it factored, take each part and set it equal to 0. It's the same idea. It's just going to be these are going to be a little trickier to factor. An important thing to remember, if you can factor out a GCF, then you do not have to use the slip and slide method, which is the hard way. And we've done this before. If you can take out a GCF, sometimes that will prevent you from having to go through all 4 steps in the bottom right of your factoring reference sheet. It will save you a lot of time if you catch what the GCF is. If you don't, you can go through all 4 steps and you will, and you probably won't get the right answer. You have to take the GCF out first. You'll get close, but you won't get technically the right answer. So let's look at example 1. First thing on example 1 I noticed, which is kind of nice, is what?
They have a great factor.
Even before that.
It's equal to 0.
Equal to 0, yeah. So you always want to make sure it's equal to 0. So this is already equal to 0, which is kind of nice. And the next thing we look at, as I look at factoring it, you always want to look for a GCF. Like Brian said, there is a GCF. What is the GCF of 3x squared plus 9x minus 12? 3. So I'm going to factor out a 3. Always look for a GCF first. It will make your life a lot easier. There will be some on the homework that has a GCF that you can factor out right at the beginning. If I take out a 3, let's see what's left. 3 times what gives me 3x squared? 3 times what gives me 9x? And 3 times what gives me negative 12? Negative 4. So make sure you actually write out what the GCF, what's left when I take out the GCF. Before you try to do 2 parentheses, write what is left when you take the GCF, then you can go through. Now, I have a 3 out front, so I need to look inside my parenthesis, and I need to try to factor that part. X squared plus 3x minus 4, another step. So as I look at this, it's a trinomial. What's in front of x squared now? 1, so we can use the shortcut. So factoring out a GCF will sometimes allow you to not have to use the 4-step longer way to do it. Sometimes it will allow you to be able to do the shortcut because it will leave you with a positive 1 in front of x squared. I can do x and x. So 2 numbers that multiply to give me a negative. So I know one's positive and one's negative. If it's easier for you to think about the sign first, they have to multiply to give me a negative 4. So one has to be positive, one has to be negative. 2 numbers that multiply to give me negative 4 and add to give me a positive 3. 4 and negative 1. Like I said, if the two numbers are next to each other, 1 will usually be one of your numbers, usually. 5 and 6 is a case where not always, but usually it will be. So x plus 4, x minus 1. Do I have this equation solved? Remember, solve has to be x equals. I have it factored. I do not have it solved. So what do I do with each factor to solve it? Set equal to 0. So each factor, 3 is considered a factor. So 3 equals 0, x plus 4 equals 0, and x minus 1 equals 0. So once I have it factored, just like yesterday, so it's the same big idea as yesterday, you take each part and set it equal to 0. 3 is a factor, so I set equal to 0. X plus 4 equals 0, x minus 1 equals 0. Now I have 3 equations, and let's look at solving each one. What is my solution if 3 equals 0? Can 3 ever equal 0? No. So that one doesn't work. Anytime you have a constant equal to another constant and they're not the same number, you just cross it out. Okay, x plus 4 equals 0. Subtract 4. X equals negative 4. That's one answer. Add 1. X equals 1. That's your other answer. So those are my two answers. X equals negative 4 and x equals 1. Any questions? Yes? No? Just kidding. It's like an auction. You raised your hand. So.
No,
I know.
I just don't want to be
You're good. Hey, it's okay. We don't always want to have to be here. I feel the same way sometimes too. Okay, example 2. Huh? I don't even know. That's fine. I'm not trying to know. Okay, let's look at example 2. So as I look at example 2, I notice it is already equal to 0. So if I set it equal to 0, let's see, it's already equal to 0. As I try to factor this, what is the GCF for 5x squared minus 20x minus 60? 5. So take a 5 out. Always try to factor a GCF out first if you can. Sometimes you will, sometimes you won't. So as I look at this, I take a 5 out front, and let's see what's left. So 5 times what gives me 5x squared?
X.
Thank you, x squared. Then I look at my next term. 5 times what gives me negative 20x?
negative 4x.
Negative 4x. And then 5 times what gives me negative 60? Negative 12. If you don't know, divide it out on your calculator. 60 divided by 5. So 5 times negative 12 is negative 60. So take out a GCF. Now, Caleb, if you see what's left, I have a 5 out front. When I look inside my parenthesis, I have a positive 1 in front of x squared now, which means I can use the shortcut way to factor this. So if I look at trying to factor this using the shortcut, because there's a positive 1 in front of x squared now, I need two numbers that multiply to give me negative 12 and add to give me negative 4. Negative 6 and positive 2. So like I said yesterday, if you struggled with factoring and didn't put a ton of time into understanding when we did the factoring chapter, this is going to be harder for you guys because you have to be able to factor. So as I look at it, the two numbers are negative 6 and 2. They multiply to give me negative 12, and they add to give me negative 4. Is this solved? No. You have to take, just like yesterday, each factor and set it equal to 0. So I'm going to take each factor and set it equal to 0. 5 equals 0. Do I have to be worried about 5 equals 0? Nope. Because that's just no solution, so you can just cross it out. X plus 6 equals 0, I can solve. So add 6, x equals 6 is one answer. Subtract 2, x equals negative 2. Those are my two solutions. So what does that mean? If I would graph this parabola, because it's a quadratic, so if I graph this parabola, what does that tell me about the graph? What's going to happen when x is 6 and x is negative 2? It's going to cross. These are my solutions. So if I would graph this, you will notice that the parabola will cross the x-axis at 6 and negative 2. This is just a different way of finding those because graphing is hard to do sometimes. Okay, any questions so far? Okay, let's go ahead. I want to do a couple harder ones with you. Let's look at number 11. So flip it, or sorry, number 12. So flip it over. Let's look at number 12. Now, we're not going to do 11. I don't really care if you want to do. We're going to do 12 and 14. So if you're afraid you're going to run out of space for 12, if you want to, I'm going to do it. I'm going to move 12 up here. I don't really care where you do it. We're only going to do 12 and 14 on this page. So if you're afraid you're going to like run out of room with 12, just do it and start it on the box above it. I don't really care where you do it. So as I look at 12, let me go ahead and write it out. 8x squared plus 3 equals 10x. Factoring is how we always want to try to solve it first, because that's the easiest way. So we always try to factor it first. So as I look at this, kind of going back to what we talked about yesterday, what issue do I see first before I try to factor it?
It's not equal to 0.
It's not equal to 0. I have to get equal to 0. So what would be the easiest thing to move over to get one side equal to 0? 10x. So I'm going to subtract 10x from both sides. And there's not another 10x, there's not another x to put it with on the left side, so I'm just going to throw it over there somewhere. Now as I write my left side, what is my left side going to look like?
8x squared plus 3 minus 10.
Go ahead and put it in standard form. So I'm just going to have you put it in standard form. So put the 10x in the middle, because that's going to help you with factoring. So 8x squared minus 10x plus 3. So just go ahead and put it in standard form. Hunter, put that other homework away. You can do it later. Actually, you can't do it later. It's not math. Like, put it away in your folder, because it'll sneak back out later. Okay, so as I look at this, this is in standard form. 8x squared minus 10x plus 3. So let's look for a GCF first. Is there a GCF for 8, 10, and 3? No, there's no GCF. There's nothing I can factor out, but I'm going to have to factor this the long way. So as you look at your reference sheet, there's no GCF. So I move on to step 2. There's 3 terms, and there is not a positive 1 in front of x squared. There is an 8. So I'm going to have to go through those 4 steps. So look at your reference sheet. What is the first thing I have to do? I'm going to do the 4 steps out to the side here. So I have to multiply what 2 numbers? 8 and 3. So 8 times 3 is what? 24. 8 times 3 is 24. So that's the first step. Multiply the first and last number. So you should be looking at your reference sheet, because this is giving you the 4 steps. The second step is I need to find what?
2 numbers that add to get 24 and they get negative 10.
Multiply to give me 24. So I need 2 numbers that multiply to give me 24 and add to give me negative 10. Make sure you keep the negative with it. So this should look familiar. Like I said, this is the hard way to do it, but we've done it before, so it should look familiar. So let's think about the 2 numbers. If they multiply to give me a positive, but add to give me a negative, what are my signs going to be? Both negatives. So I'm going to have 2 negative numbers. That's the only way to multiply to get a positive and add to get a negative. So let's think. What are some things that multiply to give me 24? Start listing them.
Negative 6 and 4.
Negative 6 and negative 4. So those are 2 things that multiply to give me a positive 24 that add to give me negative 10. Negative 6 and negative 4. Now if you notice, I kind of am doing the work to the side. So I'm not putting it right underneath it. I'm just going to put the factored form underneath it. I'm kind of doing the work to the side. So what do I do once I find those 2 numbers? Step 3 is to do what with them? For what? Do what? Yeah, so instead of negative 10x, I have negative 6x minus 4x plus 3. And I'm not putting equal 0. I'm just doing the factoring work to the side, and then I'll put it back underneath it in a second. So once you find those 2 numbers, you replace the middle term with negative 6x and negative 4x. I'm replacing negative 10x, so don't forget the x's with them. Step 4, I do what?
Factor by group.
Yes, and why would, as you look at your polynomial now, why would you factor by grouping?
Because
There's 4 terms, so we always factor by grouping with 4 terms. So look at my first 2. 8x squared minus 6x. What is the GCF for 8x squared minus 6x?
2x.
2x, so I bring a 2x out front. As I look at what's left, 2x times what gives me 8x squared? 4x. 2 times what gives me negative 6x? Negative 3. Good. So hopefully, it's been a little while since we've done this, but hopefully this kind of is ringing a bell again. Now I look at my last two, negative 4x plus 3. Now remember, the parentheses have to be the same when you do factoring by grouping. So what is the GCF of negative 4x plus 3? Now look at your signs, because I want to get a 4x minus 3. So what do I need to take out to switch the signs? Negative 1. So I'm taking out a negative 1. So I have a 4x minus 3 left. I have to take out a negative 1, so I get a 4x minus 3. Now, is this the final factored form? No. How do I write my final answer?
Take what's outside the parentheses and put it in parentheses, and then use right for it.
Yeah. So what's outside the parenthesis goes in 1, so 2x minus 1 goes in one parenthesis, and the two things that are the same in the parenthesis go in your other one, 4x minus 3. Now, is this equation solved? No. All I did was factor it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back up here, write my factored form right underneath it, set it equal to 0. So I like factoring it to the side, and then once you get it factored, just put it in underneath it. Now, is this solved? No, because I don't have x equal numbers. So what do I have to do to actually solve this now? Set each factor equal to 0. So 2x minus 1 equals 0, and 4x minus 3 equals 0. No, because it's not factoring. So 2x minus 1 equals 0, and 4x minus 3 equals 0. Now I have two equations. You know how to solve these. How do I solve the first one? 2x minus 1 equals 0. Add 1. Add 1. 2x equals 1. Divide by 2. X equals a half. Just keep it as a reduced fraction. Don't try to get a decimal. So x equals a half. The next one, 4x minus 3 equals 0. Add 3. Add 3. 4x equals 3. Divide by 4, x equals 3/4. I know these take a while. That is why you want to try to find a GCF first, and it'll save you some work, some steps. Okay. Questions so far on this? Okay, we already did 12. Okay, we want to look at one more, and then I'll give you time to work on homework. Let's look at 14. I'm picking harder ones to do with you, which I'm fine with. So if I look at 14, we always want to try to factor first. So as I look at 14, I need to get it equal to 0. So tell me how I would get this equal to 0.
Subtract 8x or x squared.
Yeah, it doesn't really matter. You could have subtracted 5x squared and minus 7x. You'll get the same answer eventually. But I'm going to subtract. I usually just bring things to the left side unless there's a big advantage. So minus x squared minus 2. So I'm going to take my x squared plus 2, use the opposite because I'm moving it to the other side. Let's see what I have. Now, as you write your left side, make sure you write it in standard form. So start with your x squared. What's 5x squared minus x squared? 4x squared. Now make sure you write it in standard form. So now I'm looking at my x. Can I actually do 7x minus 2? No, because they don't have the same term. So it's just going to be plus 7x minus 2 equal to 0. So be careful as you're writing the left side. If you move things over, just see what's left, put it in standard form, because that's going to help you factor it. So now as I look at this, is there a GCF? Always look for a GCF first. Is there a GCF for 4, 7, and negative 2? No, there's no GCF. So I go through and I say, okay, step 2, there's 3 terms. I ignore the equal 0 part. There's 3 terms. Is there a positive 1 in front of x squared? Is there a positive 1 in front of x squared? No, there's a 4. So I'm going to have to do it the 4-step way. Like I said, we split the factoring up into 2 days. Today is going to have some of the trickier factoring. Still doable. We've still done it before. That's why I split it up into 2 days. So we can go a little slower. So the first step, what's the first thing I do? You should be looking at the 4 steps on your reference sheet. First thing I do.
Multiply the first one.
Yep, so 4 times negative 2. So multiply, we're ignoring the equal 0. We're only looking at the polynomial on the left side. 4 times negative 2 is negative 8. Step 2, I need to find 2 numbers that multiply to give me what? Negative 8, and add to give me 7. Now, like I've said before, those 2 numbers are next to each other, so I'm thinking 1 will usually be one of my numbers. So let's think. If they have to multiply to give me a negative, I know my signs have to be a positive and a negative number, because that's the only way to multiply to get a negative number. So as I look at this, what 2 numbers multiply to give me negative 8, but add, which would really be subtracting, because they're 2 different signs, subtract to give me 7. Negative 8 and 1. Does that add to give me positive 7?
Or wait, 8 and then.
Negative 1 and 8. So check your signs. They have to add to give me a positive 7, so my bigger number has to be positive. They multiply to give me negative 8. They add to give me positive 7. Good. Any questions so far? Third step. What do I do with negative 8 what do I do with negative 1 and 8? Plug them in for 7x. So 4x squared minus x, which is your minus negative 1x, plus 8x minus 2. I'm doing it separate. I'm not putting it equal to 0. I'm just factoring it, and then I'll put it back in and then go to set each part equal to 0. So I take negative 1 and a positive 8, and I plug it in where 7x is. So I have to put x's with it. Now look at each term. I have 4 terms, so the fourth step is factoring by grouping. So I look at 4x squared minus x. What is the GCF of 4x squared and then negative x? X. So I'm going to take x and I'm going to pull it out. So I'm going to take my x value and I'm going to pull it out front. So I have 4x minus 1 left. Dossie, put your phone on my desk. I've said it for the past 2 weeks. Thank you. So as I take an x out front, I have a 4x minus 1. You're fine, you can leave it. It doesn't really matter. It's just paper straight. Thank you. So as I take an x out front, I have a 4x minus 1 left. Now as I look at 8x minus 2, what is the GCF for 8x minus 2? 2. So I take a 2 out. Let's see if I get the same thing left as I take a 2 out. 2 times what gives me 8x? 2 times what gives me negative 2? Negative 1. Okay, so as you factor by grouping, your parentheses need to end up being the same. Now, what is my final factored form? 4x minus 1. So these take a while. That's why I want to give you time to work on these. So we got it factored using the 4 steps. Once you get it factored, plug it back in to here. So this is the factored form. I set equal to 0. Now my directions are going to stay solve. So I need to actually solve this. So what do I do to solve each of these factors? Set them equal to 0. So x plus 2 equals 0. 4x minus 1 equals 0. So it's the same idea we did yesterday, except it's going to be a little harder to factor. So x plus 2 equals 0. Minus 2, x equals negative 2 is the first one. The second equation, add 1, 4x equals 1. Divide by 4, so x equals 1/4. So my 2 answers, because it's a quadratic, so you will sometimes get 2 answers, usually I would say, for this stuff at least. X equals negative 2, x equals a 4. Thank you. Okay, any questions on this stuff? Takes a while. Doable. You've done it before. It just takes a while. Okay, so let me get the homework for you guys.
We're talking to anything on here.
Yep.